Mastering white balance and color correction is our topic today on this special Luminar Coffee Break featuring our guest. He's one of the most requested educators, photographers, and YouTube celebrities. Please welcome Jim Nix. Hello, Jim. Glad to have you on our show.
Thanks, Vanelli. Appreciate it. How are you and everybody?
Real good. Glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me find Luminar Neo and let me know if you can see that.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I need to move the Zoom window out of my way. Anyway, so yeah, so as Vanelli said, I'll be talking about white balance and color correction. And just honestly, I just like color a lot. So I'll also be doing maybe some creative stuff. Let's just see how much time we have and depend on what kind of questions we have. But one of the things I like most about Luminar is that it gives me so much control over things like light and color. And those are the things that I tend to manipulate in my images the most. So when I was talking to Vanelli about coming on, we talked about me covering some white balance stuff. So I thought I'd talk about white balance, kind of what it is, how I think about it. And I apologize, I'm trying to move some of these Zoom screens out of the way. There we go. Bear with me 1 second. I just got to be able to see all the controls. Okay, everybody see this image? Is that clear? Okay,
Yes.
So white balance, and I'm sure, you know, I can't really do a poll. And of course, unfortunately, I can't see you all. So I can't say just, hey, raise your hands. But white balance for me is basically about trying to get whatever my eyes saw as white when I was there to actually be reflected as white in the photo. So, you know, it's white balance, right? So I think of it as they're trying to balance out and make what's white in real life actually appear to be white in your photo. And there's three different basic tools that you use to do that. And that's really in any application. Of course, we're talking about Luminar Neo today, but this is similar like in Lightroom, for example, or something like that. And people also talk about temperature and tint, which to me is a component. Like white balance is the idea of you trying to balance the light. And a way or a tool that you use to do that is taking advantage of temperature and tint. And so we'll kind of walk through some of these and how they're adjusted. So like I said, three kind of basic ways to do it. The first one is, and this is on a raw file, which I definitely recommend. And by the way, there are different camera settings. You can set your white balance in the camera. With the raw file, you can adjust it in post. So I personally shoot in auto white balance. I've literally never not shot in auto white balance simply because I'm always shooting in raw, and therefore I can go in and adjust it in post simply and easily. And frankly, creatively. And that's the other reason I shoot in auto white balance. And that's because I like to be kind of creative with my colors. So I like to take something and basically make it look the way I want it to look, which may not necessarily be the way that it actually did look. Keep in mind, I'm talking about some landscapes and cityscapes like this, where color manipulation is not going to potentially turn someone off. Whereas in a portrait or a bridal shoot or something like that, you definitely want to be careful. So I'm not saying my way is right all the time. It just happens to be right all the time for me. But regardless, if you shoot in raw, you can fix it in post, I guess, is this simple way that people describe it. So there's three basic tools for adjusting white balance, and they're here in the color section in Develop Raw. So open Develop Raw, open color. And right here next to white balance, you have custom. And if you click on that, that's a drop down. So as shot is basically as shot. And if you click through these, it will adjust accordingly. And again, this is, I don't want to call them a preset because it's not really doing anything besides white balance adjustments, but it's a kind of a white balance preset. So if it was a cloudy day, you might adjust accordingly. And what happens is the temperature and that sort of thing get adjusted. Tungsten always turns things super blue, and then there's fluorescent, and then flash. That's a popular way of doing it. That is really not how I do it. The second way is just moving the temperature and tint sliders to, accommodate whatever taste you may have, or to get it looking the way you want it to look. Maybe I want a little bit softer, cooler light with a little bit of a magenta tint. I will come in and adjust temperature and tint accordingly to get that scene kind of looking the the way I want it to look. Now, keep in mind, there's also a whole lot of other things that come into play, like you could use camera profiles. I definitely recommend contrast and highlights and shadows and things like that up here. But, for today, we're really just talking about this section. So the method I typically use is just moving the temperature and tint sliders. But the third way, and this is a really interesting way, and that is with this eyedropper here. So if you can see that, you just click on the eyedropper. You click on the eyedropper, there you go. And when you hover over the photo, you can see that this little chart on the right-hand side of where my mouse is comes up and it says pick a target neutral. So what you're trying to do is pick something that it was neutral in the photo, and you're telling Luminar, okay, this is neutral, so therefore adjust the white balance accordingly. So this is a way you can have a massive shift in the overall look of your photo by paying attention to these things. So let me start with this light bulb here. So I shot this handheld, wide open and lower light, and therefore it's kind of blown out in some spots like these light bulbs. Great example for this. You see it says pick a target neutral, and if you look at the very bottom of that square, there's an R with a number, a G with a number, and a B with a number. RGB, red, green, blue, those are kind of the primary channel color channels in images. And so this number represents the balance between those three. So it truly is something neutral when all three of those are equal. Whereas if I come over here to where it's orange, you will see the red, which is orange is a primary component of, is a higher number than the green or the blue, right? Whereas I come over here where it's kind of blue, the blue or the B is 145 and the greens and reds are lower numbers. And over here, once again, the blue is higher, but there is some red. And so what happens is if you tell Luminar, hey, that is neutral, even though to me that's kind of a magenta color, it's going to basically shift the colors significantly away from whatever that bigger number is. In that case, the biggest number there is the B. So let me show you some examples. So right here, all three numbers are equal. So literally you can't get more neutral than that because all three numbers are exactly the same. So if I click on that, really nothing significant happened to the photo, because in reality, that is exactly what it looked like, right? So before and after, I mean, it's a minor shift. And you can also see, by the way, the temperature and tint over here. So let me, if you can see that the temperature and tint numbers, these will adjust accordingly. So if I come in and pick this as a target neutral, once again, they're all three the same. If I click it, it's a slight minor movement that you will see over here in the temperature and tint. You can see that they adjusted slightly. I'm going to hit reset on that. Or no, sorry, reset is up here. Let me reset that. Now, here's the RGB that I'm talking about. So let's say I come over here and I pick that orange and I say, well, that's target neutral. Well, here's something I think about a lot. And let me bring this up. And that's the color wheel. So I assume you guys have all seen a color wheel before, but basically, and I want to be clear, you can really get deep into color science. You might be able to, I can't. I'm not a color expert. I just know what I like, but I do think a lot about this color spectrum, because the colors that are opposite each other here on this color spectrum or color wheel are basically complementary. But this comes into play when you're doing white balance, because the red, the opposite is cyan, green, the opposite is magenta, and blue, the opposite is yellow. So remember, we're playing with red, green, and blue, RGB. And so when you come into something like this, where, let me find really red. There's a red. That red is 77, whereas the green is in the 40s and the blue is in the 35. So it's heavily towards red. So remember, the opposite of red is cyan. So if you say that's a target neutral, what happens is you click that and the photo says, oh, okay, well, I think that's a red. But if you're saying that's neutral, then that means I got to shift everything pretty far away from red in order to get it to look neutral. So it doesn't look neutral because it's not a neutral color. It's a red color, but that's what's happening. And so that's why I think a lot about the color wheel. So another example would be over here with some of these. Let me find something like this. Yeah, now that one is interesting. Kind of the red is 149, the blue is 157, and the green's lower. So let's click that. And it was more of that magenta cast. So it went the opposite direction toward green, right? The opposite of magenta is green. And so that's what's happening in your image when you're picking this, a target neutral that actually isn't target neutral like that. I pick that, nothing really happens, but I pick something that's not really even close to being a neutral color. Let's get this green and see what we can do. So there, green, really high number compared to the other two. The opposite of green is magenta. So I click it. And so again, it's taking the image the complete opposite direction and saying, oh, well, if that green is technically neutral, then I need to take all the colors and shift them away from the green. Away from green is magenta. So that's kind of how I think about it. And that's something to keep in mind. And that's why, frankly, this is a really useful tool, even though I don't use it a lot, because I tend to just come in and I edit by feel, where I'd come in and do this. And then I'd play with highlights and shadows, and I'd play with other color tools in Luminar. But for straight up white balance fixing, I think this eyedropper is just honestly amazing. One more example here. The blue is the highest. I click that, everything turns red, because remember, the opposite of blue is yellow, right? So it's not a full blue. So it's kind of over here, kind of on the border of yellow and red. Things basically get a red tint because it's going away from that heavy blue color that I told Luminar was neutral, but it wasn't, right? So pause there. Any questions on that? Does that raise any questions?
So far, nothing in the chat.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in this particular photo, what color would you consider being the neutral color?
I would pick that light bulb as I was showing it, because that technically is neutral. I use this photo for two reasons, and your question basically brings it up. The first one is it was really easy to pick the neutral there because, like I said, when I click on that and hover, when those three numbers are exactly equal, that means that is a neutral area. But also because there's so many varied colors here. And so I would use that, again, it's white balance. So that technically is white. It's blown out, so it looks white in the photograph, but the color temperature of the light, I don't really remember. This was several years ago. I shot in London, but let's just, I think it's safe to assume that the color balance, or excuse me, the color temperature of that light was pretty neutral. Let's try something though. Let's click on this. I keep turning that off when I mean to have it on. So yeah, so if I move away, this, let me enlarge that. That looks yellow to me, to my eye, but when I hover over it, it says that it's completely neutral there in the center. So I click it, no changes. But if I get slightly off to the edge, you see the yellow starts to come in. It's a little bit heavier on the R number than the G number. And going away from the yellow, you're going to the blue. So anyway, in short, to answer your question, I would have picked like one of these light bulbs because they look perfectly white to me. So hope that helps.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, I have a question concerning when you come in, since you do white balance auto in camera and
Yes.
it comes in raw, then you get to change it anyway. But if you go, what happens to your photo if you were to choose white balance auto in the program, have it automatically adjust the tints, saturation and vibrance for you, and then you go in and adjust it to your liking?
So that's what I do. I shoot in auto white balance. So I let the camera figure out what it thinks a target neutral is in the scene. And then if I need to, because I'm shooting raw, you have more flexibility in post. So then I come in, and if I want to leave it like it is and say that white balance is great, I shot it in auto white balance. It looks pretty white balance to me already. I could just come in and do color adjustments to my creative liking, but not necessarily need to do white balance adjustments. So
okay, so you don't press the white balance in the program to auto first.
I do. Okay. I'm sorry. Here, you mean like
that shot?
I'm sorry.
That's auto.
When you said in the program, I thought you meant in the program mode in the camera.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, as shot then.
Yeah.
That comes in from the camera.
It comes in like that. Yeah. If I reset this photo to original, it should show as shot. Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
So as shot on a raw file it's going to show up like that. It's always going to show up as shot for me because that's auto white balance. So it's always going to show that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
One more, Richard.
Jim, when you focused on that light bulb and all R, G, and B were all identical, would
Yeah.
you also consider that term neutral gray? I always thought you looked for neutral gray.
Yeah. So this goes back a long ways before my time in photography by miles, I'm sure. But people used to say, I think it was an 18% gray card, for a better word. If that rings a bell, this is not something I ever do, just to be clear. And so I don't want to claim to be an expert in this, but I believe a lot of people will say, well, I got to get the white balance right. So let me get an 18% gray card, set the white balance off of that. Once you get it locked in, then you say, okay, I've got a neutral white balance, and then you go shoot. But I just don't do that. The cameras are way smarter than I am. And because you're shooting in RAW, frankly, I honestly don't see a reason to do that. So yeah, I say a neutral color. I'm saying white here, but yeah, I would say technically, I think most people would say they're looking for a neutral gray. Yeah. And I think it's very technically and specifically, I think it's 18% gray, but I'm not going to carry a card around and try to do that, especially when you're shooting in cities like this, where I was kind of shooting and this couple just walking towards me and then they stopped and kissed. And I was like, hey, I wasn't being a voyeur. I was there first. They did it in front of me, but it kind of made a good photo, so that, you don't have time to say, well, let me get my gray card out and fix it. I'm shooting. And so another reason I shoot in RAW, just because I have all the flexibility I want in post.
Hey, Jim, we have one more question.
Yeah.
Richard?
No, that was my question was answered already.
Gotcha. All right, great. Thanks. All right, Jim.
Okay, cool. I was just going to show how you do this creatively, on, I tell you what, here's a scene. Now this is just a JPEG, I think. Yeah, it's not going to show up as developed RAW, but when I go in color, for this, I would normally come in and say, well, I want a little bit more blue, but there's so much green. See these lights. And this is one of the reasons I started playing with white balance so much in my editing, is because I shoot in cities a lot. This was from Paris from years ago. And with cities, they always have some kind of weird color cast that's kind of green or orange or yellow. And I don't always really like it very much. This one's very green. And so what's the opposite of green? Well, the opposite of green is magenta. So for me, this is, you can adjust the temperature a little bit to make things a little bit bluer, but you're only going to get so far in terms of correcting that green. And that's where tint comes in. When I start dragging the tint to the right, magically in air quotes, that green is gone. And that's what it looks like. In reality, I wasn't standing there saying, God, I love this green tile work. Nobody was saying that. It shouldn't look green. It just looks that way in the photo. But in reality, it looked more like that. The thing you got to be careful about is the little halos, for lack of a better word, around the lights, where, if you go too much on temperature, they're really going to turn blue, that kind of thing. So it's like everything for me, it's the term I like to use is a delicate dance. It's a little bit of a delicate dance between getting the temperature and the tint right. And that's why I use these two sliders more often than I use anything else. And that's just because I'm tweaking it and I'm just coming in and saying, I like that, and I feel like I get the results I want more quickly by moving the temperature and tint slider, as opposed to coming in and saying, well, let me come in and go find a neutral. Let's see, is that neutral? No, that's too blue. Let's try, well, let me reset it so I'm not looking at those adjusted colors. Maybe here's a neutral. Hey, there you go. And, blah, blah, blah. So I just don't do it that way. I prefer to come in and just do this because I feel like I can more quickly get to it. And again, if you keep these, the color wheel in mind, what the opposite colors are, then, if you've got something that's too blue, if you go the other way with the temperature, you're going to get more towards the yellows and the reds. And if you have something that's too green, you go the other way, you're going to get something a little bit more magenta. And so that's kind of what it is for me. It is, it's white balance, trying to get, basically, I would call it kind of a neutral starting point. Like that looks more like a neutral starting point to me than that does. That's just way too green and kind of ugly, but that looks a lot better, I think. And then I would go in and say, okay, now I've got my base temperature, I guess, and tint, white balance, if you will. Now I want to go do my creative color stuff. Maybe I want to, soften the oranges in that right-hand side so it's not as bright over there. Maybe I want to, do whatever. So it's just something that I think about. So questions on that?
Nope, we're good. Let's go on to the next.
Okay. Yeah. After that, I just kind of thought I would do some like kind of creative fun, if you will, for lack of a better word, with color and kind of how the different colors tools work and that sort of thing. So if that's okay, we'll just kind of move into that. But I felt like the white balance discussion was kind of the first one to have. That'd be all right. Any questions for the rest of that? I haven't really had a.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Nick, back on the first photo, I would think to get the most accurate white balance, you would need a reflective surface like white, like the sign was white, because then you're getting the sky and the light bulbs and anything else in the scene. It would combine it and give you the most accurate white. You know what I'm saying? It's the same theory as when you had the gray card way back when.
Yeah.
So the white of the sign would take in the sky's color also. All bulbs are usually warm. And I don't know why Neo is giving you, not this photo, the other, the first one.
Oh, the city. Okay, the other city. Here we go.
Yeah. If you see, all bulbs usually are warm.
Yeah.
Although it's giving you a white on the bulb, but I don't trust it. But if you go to like this sacred sign on the left, you're going to get in the color of the sky, the bulbs, any other lights in the scene, I would
Like here?
imagine. And that would be more accurate.
So
Just
you're
doing
saying
the
like,
bulbs is giving you a good color.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it is, but you're missing what's coming out of the sky.
Gotcha. You could also go just to the sky, and that's not quite, you can see there, it's a little bit more
Right.
in the blue. So it's going to give it a little bit warmer look, but the numbers were close enough together in that these three numbers, they're close enough together that the shift from the way it was to the new white balance is not that much, right? Whereas when the numbers are bigger, the change is more drastic, right?
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. I was going to do like an example here of like using white balance coming in and kind of doing what we're talking about, just kind of popping around here. I also thought, again, if it's heavier on the red, you click it, it's going to go more to the blue. If you're more on the blue here, you click it, goes a little bit to the, a little bit warmer. But for me, it's really just, I edit by feel. Basically, I just want to make myself happy. So if I end up with colors and temperatures and tints and white balance, however you want to describe it, if I end up with something that I like, then personally, I consider that a good photo, right? So that's just kind of how I think of things. So for an image like this, I would actually start up here, add some contrast because it's missing a bit of that. It was very flat. I'd pull the highlights down a little bit, maybe lift the shadows, maybe play a little bit with the whites and blacks. I don't want to lose the white that's in those incoming waves. And then I might come over here and do a little temperature and tint, a little vibrance, maybe not that much tint, maybe a little bit more warmth. When I have images like this, where there's a fair amount of blue and some warmth, I like to bring that blue up, but also bring up some of the warmth because the warm and cool kind of play off of each other. So for an image like this, I would go next to golden hour and give that a nice pop. And you can see how that really enhances the overall scene, right? It gives a nice pop to those warmer tones. So it brings them back a little bit because the blues before that were definitely dominating. And they dominated in real life because there's kind of a thin sliver of that warmth, but now it's kind of, making its way across more of the photo, which I think looks nice. So, that's, again, I mean, everybody has their own way of doing it. I just personally prefer to kind of come in, do what I want to do and develop by moving the sliders around, picking what looks like a good starting point, and then going down and further refining the colors, and the tones from there, depending on whatever suits my taste, for example, on that particular image. And then, from there, you know, if you didn't use something like golden hour, you could drop that, maybe go down to toning instead. So if you haven't used toning, it's a fantastic tool, like split toning basically. So you go into highlights, add some warmth. You could go into shadows and maybe cool it off a little bit. So that would be like around 230 or so. And you can get a nice, you know, different kind of color look, you know, than you would necessarily with just golden hour. So this one, it's a different kind of blue with some warmth in it still, because I added warmth to the highlights, and, you know, there's a lot of highlights in this image. So again, it's season to taste. And in fact, I would take that and actually maybe use a little golden hour too, because it really gives a nice pop to those warmer tones. I think just be careful. I like my colors. I like color a lot. And I definitely like make videos and I edit photos and I finish and I think, oh God, I love the look of that. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh man, I was way over the top. It's good to let it bake or, you know, simmer, whatever the word is, you know, choose your cooking analogy, to just chill for a little while and then come back and take a look at it, because I get slider happy at times, and you may not. And if you don't, that's great. You probably have more self-control than I do, but I do like moving the sliders around. It's just kind of fun. So yeah, marinate. There we go. So, okay. Any questions on that? Any comments on?
Now, Jim, they were asking, do you use a color calibrator like X-Rite or Color Monkey on your monitors?
I really don't, and I need to. Yeah, I was thinking that somebody would bring that up. I need to do that, but I really haven't.
If only you had a friend that was a color arty.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
If you only had a friend with X-Rite that's a color arty.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll get you one of those.
Yeah. So, yeah, I especially like if you're printing, I imagine that's going to come into to play quite a bit, right? So,
yeah, but you brought up a good point. You're starting. It's a suggestive starting point, and like Carl mentioned in the chat, a perfect white balance sometimes isn't what you're after.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's creativity. Like
Right.
looking at this image here, I love what you do with the colors. You know, were those colors just like that when you were there? Who cares? Now, you know, if this were a print ad and a blue shirt has to be a blue shirt, then that's something totally different. You know, but for landscapes, I just think I love what you did there.
Yeah, no, and that's why I said in the beginning, when I made the distinction that I tend to shoot landscapes and cityscapes, where I feel like you can do things with color that you probably could not get away with most kind of portraits. I mean, you're a portrait artist. So, you know, I think that you probably don't want to have an overly blue or overly warm, you know, bride. You don't want her dress to look blue when she should be in white or whatever. So I think about color a lot, but I would say I don't worry about it. Like, oh, is that how it looked? No, that's not really how it looked. But like, with all due respect to those that want to get it right, that's fine. But like, I don't care if it's right. I just care that I like it. And that's kind of what I said earlier. I feel like for landscapes and cityscapes, unless you're like on assignment for somebody and they say, you know, I need it to look like this or whatever, and then that's what it looks like, then that's one thing. But when you're out shooting and editing for yourself or for fun or for sharing on, you know, wherever you like to share your photos, I personally think you ought to do whatever you want to do if it makes you happy. And that's kind of how I approach editing for landscapes and cityscapes. Again, I think you have more creative freedom with those than you do with some other genres. And so, yeah, in other words, I'm not a photojournalist. I definitely edit based on what my likes are or my moods or whatever. And I love the creative tools that Luminar Neo gives you, because I don't have any other app that I've ever used that gives me this much control over color and, you know, just the flexibility with color and the control with color and all the tools to enhance color. So one of the reasons I love Luminar so much, it just lets me do so much. And that makes me happy, because, you know, when I edit a photo and I walk away and I look at that and I think, oh, that's awesome looking. I love that, you know. That's kind of my goal. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Let's see, what else could we do here? Do you want to, well, here, we could do something like this.
Oh, yeah.
This is from the Luminar Photo Camp.
Yeah, I know, Jim. Thank you. Keep reminding me of that, Jim.
Sorry. I know you should have been there, man. I'm so sorry. Um, yeah, so this is an example where the white balance, it's definitely very blue, and in reality, it wasn't that blue, but that's what it looks like. And that's how it was, as shot. Let me just hit reset and make sure there's nothing to reset. So that's how it came out of the camera. So what I want to do is maybe adjust that. So once again, if you come in here and do these kind of things, if you're looking for kind of a target neutral, that's kind of close, but a little heavy in the blue. So when I click it, it gets a little bit warmer. That actually is probably more what it looked like actually right there. As the sand is definitely black, the water is going to be more white. That warm streak in the sky is definitely going to be warm like it is. And while it was sunrise, it wasn't super blue in the sky. I don't think things were that blue, right? So that's probably more what it looked like. But again, if you come in and say, well, this blue is really my target neutral, then it's really going to go warm because again, based on the color wheel, it's going a long way away from the blue. It's going over here to the yellows and reds. So, for me, I actually tend to start up here and just kind of balance this light out a little bit. Maybe here, I don't want to lift the highlights. I'm pull the shadows down a little bit and make that sand even darker, but maybe lift the whites a little bit so that I can get some nice, I want that sea foam stuff that's in motion to really be white. Now, this is where, all things considered, by the way, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel. I'm sure you feel the same way I do. Number one, the news the other day that the Skylum team is doing fine was fantastically amazing. I'm sure it made you as happy as it made me. And the fact that they made an update to Luminar Neo and got it out, considering what's going on in Ukraine, is it's heroic and inspiring. So I'm sure you are as happy as I am about that. And I will say, in the future, my hope is that we have a J key, which would with a histogram, so that we'll be able to look at spots. Because when I start lifting the whites and playing with highlights, I want to get these things whiter, but I don't want to get any blown out spots. And that's where the histogram and the J key will help me know if I've got something I've blown out or I've got something that's just completely lost in shadow. I will admit I care a whole lot more about the highlights than I do about the shadows. So like I definitely have photos where I drag the shadows, make them fairly dark. And even looking at it like in Luminar AI with the J key on the histogram, it might turn blue, get those blue kind of blinkies, which says, hey, this is completely black. I don't really care about that a whole lot, depending on where it is in the photo. But if I get the red blinkies where it's completely blown out in the highlights, I care about that a lot. But all I'm doing here is balancing the light. But the thing is, keep in mind, I haven't done anything to the color yet, but you can see how the color looks a little bit different, right? The blue, it's more alive, and the warm tones are a little bit softer. So just keep in mind when you play with contrast and move light around that, colors tend to adjust as well. I think here I might go at, I don't know, I like the blue a lot. I do like my blues. I don't want to go too magenta. I may not do very much with color temperature here. So I think I would probably leave it like that. But this is where I would definitely want to come in and bring golden hour and get a little enhancement to some of those warm tones. But you know what? I don't like what it's doing to the rest of the image, to be honest. So instead of that, we'll go try toning. I don't have a plan for this photo in case you can't tell. So if you're like, Jim, what are you doing? You're not really following a plan here.
It's
That's
your
because
thought
I'm not.
process.
What's that?
It's your thought process.
Yeah, it kind of is. So I'm not really liking toning either. So this leads me to my next favorite tool, which is color harmony and specifically color balance. So in the highlights, I might want to go a little bit warmer, maybe a little bit of yellow, maybe a little bit of magenta. I don't know. I'm just kind of winging it. It's getting very soft there. Let me see what I get out of these midtones. That might help a little bit. Yeah, it's a little too much. I don't know. I feel like this is an example of where I'm not really sure what I would do. I would probably just take my time and experiment because, pardon me, I'm not really digging the colors I've come up with on this image. I kind of like that where I'm adding blue into the shadows. It creates a little bit more depth in the image, I feel like. But I definitely want to get warmer stuff up in the sky. So
Hey, Jim,
I need
try dehaze.
Yeah, dehaze is good. I was also just trying that. Let me go up to dehaze. So that's here. Let's try that. Boom. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Although what I need to do now is go to color and take HSL and get the saturation of that blue and just take that down a little bit because I don't want to overdo that blue.
Jim,
Yeah,
this might be one of those situations where you can use Neo's capacity to do multiple tool edits and masking.
Oh yeah.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I got a video recorded this morning that I did that, and I talked about that quite a bit. So that'll be coming out here pretty soon. But yeah, absolutely. So you can come in here and do these things like that, and then you might come back with color and say, all right, I'm done with that. Now I want color again, but this time I want these reds and yellows and oranges to be a little bit more saturated. Do something like that, and then you can mask it in if you want to, and then come back and do something else if you need to. So in this case, I actually might use develop again. And I tend to do that a bit. Yeah, just need to take control of that a little bit. Might actually lift the shadows a tad. Maybe I'll pull the whites down just a little bit. Yeah, it's always experimentation for me anyway. But like I said, I feel like I need to play around with this one a little bit. Now I'm kind of like, got a little challenge here. Because I want there to be a blue feeling to it. I mean, you're real close to the Blue Lagoon. No, not the Blue Lagoon. It's got a long Icelandic name, something lagoon, but it's the iceberg lagoon. But there's a lot of blue. It's winter, it's ice, but I don't want to have too much blue. I feel like we probably don't have time for me to figure all this out while we're live.
Jim,
So,
would you consider taking a picture like that and converting it to black and white?
yes, I would. Except my thing is when I have some warmth in the sky, I really like warmth, like sunrise and sunsets. And so it's hard for me to decide that should be a black and white when I really like these warmer tones. I like hey, pretty much this is a cool image overall, but I've got a little bit of warmth in it, but for sure it could work as a black and white. This is the one I made the video about today where I actually made it a black and white, except I left the coat red. So
I saw that.
I did that at the visual storytelling conference. Yeah. So I made a video out of that today. That'll be on YouTube here and probably next week. But there's a lot of things you can do. So here's another example of white balance. Since that's what we're talking about, this is a JPEG. But for this one, if you come in and say, all right, this is target neutral, you can say they all say 254. I click that, no real change in the image. But if I come over here and say that is target neutral, even though it's heavy on the reds, it converts it to more blue. Now, this is a situation where I would do that to get me kind of close to my temperature and tint starting point, because by the way, it's a JPEG. So the temperature is no longer in Kelvin. It's just a sliding scale of like negative 100 to positive. Yeah. Negative to positive 100, but I think that was negative 44 or so, right? But it's not in Kelvin when you're not with a raw file. But this is a situation where I did that and I'm like, ooh, I like that. It gives me an idea. So I would use the dropper as a starting point to get an inspiration, for lack of a better word, about what direction I want to take my edit. Because a photo like this, I definitely would want to play with the colors. This would actually be really cool as a black and white as well, except leave the streaks of the passing cars in color. But you can do all kinds of things. Again, I would just need to come in and have a play. But there's a lot of things you could do. This is where golden hour might really pop some of those warmer tones. This is a bridge here in Austin, not too far from where I live. So I shoot this place quite a bit. And color harmony would be great here probably. Brilliance and warmth. Let me just check on the warmth. Yeah, I actually kind of like it cooler because I like that warm light splitting it, so to speak. Split color warmth. Let's make the warm colors warmer. Give them a little extra pop. Let's go into the shadows and give them a little bit more blue. And the highlights, maybe give them a little bit magenta and red. I don't know. Again, I'm kind of making it up. Didn't really have a plan on this one either. But
no, but it's
some
good, it's good to
adjustments.
see your thought process, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's all. I mean, you can make a big difference here in just a couple of minutes. Again, another reason why I love Neo is like you can do so much creatively. And if you don't want to take advantage of creative stuff, if you don't want to do, color shifts and things like that that you might consider unnatural. That's, you know, to each his own. That's fine. You still have a lot of power in Neo. It still does a lot of great things for you, of course. So, but yeah, so that's that.
Jim, that's awesome. Now, did you want to stop sharing your screen for a moment? We're gonna
Oh yeah.
segment over to the Ask Me Anything segment. But before we do, we're going to end our session. Jim, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you at the next coffee break.